Good afternoon. Welcome to the panel discussion of the Edelstam Prize Award ceremony. My name is Ana Deveza. I am an environmental engineer and environmentalist from Brazil, and today I have the honor to mediate this discussion. Let me start by introducing to you our distinguished panelists. Here in the studio with me, we have Mr. Alex Brecke, Secretary General of Amazon Watch Sweden. And we have online Ambassador Hans Corell. Please say hi. He served as Undersecretary General for Legal Affairs and the Legal Council of the United Nations, and also as Ambassador and Undersecretary for Legal and Consular Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sweden. Speaking from Paris, we have Ambassador Bruno Stagno Ugarte. Please say hi. He's the Deputy Executive Director for Advocacy and member of the Executive Management Team at Human Rights Watch. Joining us, speaking from Madrid, Dr. Carlos Castresana-Fernandez, who was appointed as High Commissioner of the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala. He also served as prosecutor in the Superior Courts of Justice in Madrid and Catalonia. So, we would have also today Ms. Parul Sharma, who is a human rights lawyer with focus on sustainable development, but unfortunately, she cannot be here because of health issues. So, Ms. Sharma, if you were watching us, I really wish you can get better soon. So, Mr. Brecke, since you are here in the studio with me, I would like to start with you. And just a reminder for all the panelists, we are having 2 rounds of questions and then a final round of concluding remarks. So we already learned a lot about the importance of the Amazon, the ecosystem services, climate change mitigation, the impact in the water cycle. So I'd like to know from you, why environmental defenders are also human rights defenders?
Well, it's because to try and protect the rainforest especially is very dangerous, especially in Brazil. Rainforest defenders often face threats of violence, harassment, and every year a number of them are murdered. So it's very dangerous to try and protect the biodiversity of the Amazon. And also one reason why they want to protect the rainforest is not only because of the environmental need, it's also because the rainforest is the indigenous people's home, it's their culture, it's their heritage. So if the rainforest is lost, then their lives are lost in a sense. So that's why to protect the rainforest for indigenous people and for other rainforest defenders is a human rights issue as well as an environmental issue. And it's also, of course, a question of land grabbing and territory rights because the indigenous people in the Amazon belongs to them and not to the multinational corporations trying to extract all the resources.
Thank you. This thoughts are really interesting, especially the indigenous about how they are connected to the environment for their religion and their spirituality. Thank you for this. I would like to talk now with Ambassador Hans Corell. Ambassador, you told me that you had some experience with indigenous peoples in the north of Sweden. We just watched a wonderful performance. I don't even know how to pronounce their name, I'm sorry. But could you tell us how can we draw parallels between their struggles and the struggles in the peoples in the Amazon?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't see the performance because we were waiting for this session to start. So I'd rather answer your question in a more global context, because this is what fears me most. It's very important to protect environmentalists for the simple reason that climate change will be an enormous threat to human rights in the future. We will see rising sea levels, and we will see desertification, which means that there will be climate refugees that seek somewhere to live. Are they welcome? We see already now the tensions that these movements cause. And this is very dangerous. And also the food production might be affected, and this might lead to starvation in certain areas. So this development may result in more criminal activities and also affecting people in general. So these are just examples of the concerns that I feel when we need to protect the environment and those who are environmentalists. And also we mustn't forget the growing world population. We were 2 billion people on the globe when the United Nations was founded in 1945. We are getting closer to 8 billion now, and we might be 9 billion to 2050. So these are enormous strains. How much can the globe take?
This is indeed a real challenge, and combining these different goals for development. I would like to ask now to Ambassador Bruno Stagno, who actually, I heard, nominated Osvalda for this prize. So, Ambassador, why Osvalda?
Well, it's obviously, we're delighted to see Osvalda as the recipient of this Edelstam. I've had the chance to meet her. Human Rights will have worked closely with her. And basically, she and her husband are the epitome of worst offenders that confront loggers who brazenly violate the law because they threaten, they attack, and at times they in their way. She represents many names. She represents the many small farmers who are to tell the authorities the name of those who are sending in chainsaws or wood-hauling trucks. She also represents the indigenous people who patrol the reserves, armed with bows and arrows. And she also represents, and here I think it's important to also note this, the public officials who work for government agencies tasked to fight environmental crime. Many of these public officials are also putting their lives at risk, especially now under the Bolsonaro administration. So all of these environmental defenders take very serious risks in confronting the illegal logging, and they have little if no expectation that the state will protect them from the criminal networks that are basically eating into the Amazon forest. And as Kellen Edelstam very rightly highlighted during the ceremony, unfortunately, these people operate in a climate of absolute impunity. Last year, for example, Human Rights Watch documented 88 killings report, and only 2 of those killings have been investigated or brought to trial. So the struggle of Osvalda and other offenders really shows the interconnect between environmental destruction and violence. The situation in the Amazon is not just an environmental crisis, but as Corell has rightly indicated, it has profound implications for efforts to fight climate change, but also a human rights crisis. And this is why protecting the Amazon also requires protecting those who, like Osvalda, are struggling to defend the forest.
Thank you, Ambassador. I would like now to ask Dr. Carlos Castresana. You have such a vast legal experience. What can you bring to us from the legal perspective?
Well, my specialty, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the Foundation for the opportunity to be here and obviously to celebrate Osvalda, who is a very justified, more than justified prize because her personal courage is making a favor to all of us. So the idea of protection of the environment was not in the initial documents or declarations of human rights, because those were much more focused on the individuals, right to life, to physical and mental integrity, the rights before a criminal process. But nobody took care in the beginning, many years ago, about collective rights. Increasingly, there are values that we see are increasingly endangered, and we need to provide the protection that we had not thought about in advance. Environment, the protection of the natural spaces that are a sanctuary must be a sanctuary because the welfare of all the mankind depend of the proper preservation of these great spaces. We are seeing as the pollution of waters, seas, lakes, rivers are increasingly dangerous for the survival of animals, but at the end of the day also for the survival of human beings. And the indigenous communities in these remote areas are not duly protected by the state authority. So increasingly we are understanding that there is a common duty from states and also from the international community as well to take care of these values, of these important collective human rights that belong to all of us, and to be sure that we leave a clean world to our children and grandchildren. The survival of humanity is at stake at the end of the day. Coming to criminal law, well, there are the initial steps. It exists already in most of the domestic legislation, offenses against the environment, but we are still in a developing part of international law. But the day will come that we will consider the most serious attacks to environment also international crimes. It is work in progress. We are increasingly aware of this necessity, and the treaties to protect from the administrative law, from the point of view of international law, are every day more and more important. And the protection of criminal law, that is always the last resort, is for the moment in the domestic level, but sooner or later will arrive to the international level. I'm sure of that.
You're right. Thank you so much. I'm really learning all these legal terms, you know, because I'm an engineer, so I'm learning a lot in this panel. Oh, so Mr. Breck, in Brazil, we already lost many environmental defenders. Chico Mendes, Dorrit Stang, for example. And we also have so many economic and social challenges in the region. It's not a simple equation to solve. And my generation and the next to come, we are really looking for solutions because we do have many problems, as we stated here. So how can we improve security of environmental defenders?
Well, I think we have to work on the international stage and make sure that all governments and all citizens work together to raise the voices of the rainforest defenders, because their voices are often not heard as much. And so we need to amplify them. And I know there are many declarations and policies to protect environmental activists, but those only work if there are repercussions if you break them. And these policies are broken very often. So we need to make sure that the indigenous people fighting for to protect the rainforest have the backing of the international community. And it's a very complicated matter because the people who are behind the destruction of the rainforest is not just one company or one government. It's a mixture of investors, banks, governments and corporations, and in the end also the consumers who buy these products. And I think that the more everybody is informed, the easier it is to place demands on these companies and these governments.
Indeed, we had a talk 2 days ago, I guess, and you said a phrase that really, I'm really reflecting about it. You mentioned that knowledge is power. So how can we bring more awareness to this?
Well, I think we need to listen more to the people who are actually on the front lines of the destruction in the Amazon, trying to protect it and amplify their voices, make sure they get to speak in the EU, in the United Nations, and in the various boardrooms that these companies that are active there have, and amplify their voices.
Yeah, that's really, really important. Ambassador Corell, you worked for a long time in the UN. What do you think the UN can bring to the table?
Well, when you ask the question, how can we protect the environmentalists, I would like first to warmly congratulate Osvalinda Alves Pereira to the award this time. When I read what she subjected to, it was really awful that somebody can have to suffer this on a daily basis. So I wish her all the best. With my UN experience, I would like to focus first on the Security Council. I'm extremely critical of the Council. And Kofi Annan and I, when we discussed the situation in Syria last year in my apartment in Stockholm in April 2012, he was very disappointed in the Council and didn't think he had the support he needs. And I've actually written about the latest reform of the Security Council under an article that is called Security Council Reform. The Council must lead by example. And among the issues that the Council should focus on is actually the environment. Environment and also empowerment of women. The prize winner this year is a woman. We shouldn't forget that. Empowerment of women for the future is extremely important. And I think that the Council should actually focus more on environment than they do and issue the rules that are necessary or the decisions that are necessary to protect the environment in the future. But in a more general sense, and as a former judge, I would say what it's all about is actually the rule of law, rättsstaten. And this is so important. And there are four elements in rättsstaten. The first one is democracy. So we have a legitimate legislator. The second is proper legislation. And this legislation has to observe the rules on human rights at the international level. They have to be translated into the laws at the national level. The third element is the institutions. The institutions that administer this law, including independent and impartial courts. And then we come perhaps to the most difficult element, namely the individuals with the knowledge and the integrity to administer these institutions. Without these, with integrity, it's very difficult to create the rule of law in a state. And this is where it starts. And if you look at the development goals, sustainable development goals, I focus specifically on goal 16, with equal justice for all, with the targets, rule of law and anti-corruption. That goal, in my view, is necessary to achieve if we are to achieve all the other goals, including the environmental ones. So this would be my reasoning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's good that you mentioned the SDGs. Because as a young Brazilian, I really feel responsible for taking care of our natural legacy. And I would like to ask Ambassador Stagno, because I think you would agree with me that conservation and development are not in opposite sides. They can be combined. And how do you see this combination happening?
Indeed, they don't need to be at odds. And I think that this is the real tragedy that we're seeing in Brazil under President Bolsonaro. What is good, however, is that there are solutions at hand. And let me just mention a few. In light of the terrible violence and harassment that we see environmental defenders in Brazil, we think that it's of utmost importance that the Congress in Brazil establish a congressional investigative commission in order to examine the criminal networks that are responsible for this illegal deforestation and violence against the forest defenders. But we also feel that the Bolsonaro administration needs to commit itself to actually dismantling the criminal networks by using its police and judicial powers in order to hold those responsible accountable for their crimes. And the administration also needs to reverse its dismantling of state agencies that were created to actually protect the environment and ensure that these environmental protection agencies not only have the autonomy to operate, but also the resources that are necessary for them to carry out their mission safely and effectively. And the administration, beginning with President Bolsonaro himself, also needs to end his verbal attacks and the unsubstantiated allegations that he has been making against environmental defenders. Now, it is very important, however, that this not be cast as something that is a fight between development, as you mentioned, and conservation. And because of this, it is quite important to seize on an opportunity that is there for us to seize. And what I refer to is the European Union Mercosur trade deal. This was agreed to in principle last June, and it includes commitments to fight deforestation and to uphold the Paris Climate Agreement. Two things that the Bolsonaro administration has obviously been flouting. So it's very important here for the European Union and its member states to actually send very clear categorical messages to Brazil and to President Bolsonaro that ratification of the trade deal will not be considered unless Brazil shows it is really ready to commit with its environmental commitments. And in this sense, the European Union should assess its readiness and that of President Bolsonaro based on two basic benchmarks, which I think both bring us back to Osvallinda. One is that there is substantial progress in ending impunity for violence against forest defenders, and this can be very easily measured by the number of cases that are investigated, prosecuted, or brought to trial. And secondly, that there is substantial progress in reducing deforestation to put Brazil back on track to meet its own targets under the Paris Agreement. You know, Bolsonaro may not care for the environment, and they actually deny climate change. Allies do care for a trade deal with the European Union. And so this is a perfect opportunity to actually environmental conservation and development and come up with something that is a solution for all.
Thank you very much for this perspective. Yes, I think institutions have an important play, and I would like to go back to the case of Osvallinda and the criminal networks that operate in Pará. And I would like to ask Dr. Castresana about impunity and the rule of law. How can we improve and face these criminal networks?
Okay, well, we are coming to the most important part of the problem regarding the example of Osvallinda and many other human rights defenders fighting for values that are really ours, that we all can share. So she could be considered someone in the first line defending our rights, not only her own rights or the rights of the communities involved in the regions where she works. The question of environment, it has already been said, has to be contemplated from the point of view also of the sustainable development. We need to make compatible, reasonable development, and the countries that are rising powers like India or China that are eager to get the most possible energy they have in order to guarantee their developments. So the question is, with the treaties for the protection of the environment, with the domestic law, we can come to terms with corporations, with airlines, with oil companies, with extractive industry in order for them continue doing their business and at the same time being respectful with the environment. We are all in the interest that this balance is ensured and is maintained. But the people who are making illegal extraction of natural resources, in the case of the Amazonia, the forest, but in other latitudes, the mining resources mostly, and they make in a criminal way, and they bring these resources to the black markets, and directly or indirectly they finance armed conflicts. In the case of these illegal extractors in the Amazonia, that not only are making something illegal from the point of view of the environment, but also are attacking the life and the integrity of the human rights defenders that very courageously are making front to this threat to all of us, instead of the government and the domestic authorities that should be in the first place with the obligation to put an end to these activities. We need to understand that the criminal law is intended precisely for this. The problem is that in most of these cases, especially in remote areas, impunity is the rule. And the rule of law is not enforced or not enough enforced. So this is the field when we need to request to the governments to fulfill their duties, not only concerning the international treaties, but the most basic fundamental rights of their citizens, and guaranteeing the protection of human rights defenders that, as I say, like journalists, like politicians in some cases, are in the first line, are the maximum risk, and are the ones that once and again suffer the retaliation of these criminal gangs that go never unpunished. The question is that it is a responsibility to all of us to guarantee that, coming from the negotiation among the countries in the international fora, as Hans Corell has been mentioning, and basically and finally the state authorities, we are safe, we are sure, and the perpetrators of serious abuses against life, against integrity and against the environment are properly prosecuted and duly punished with the rights of a due process and everything, but at the same time without the situation of impunity that is at the end of the day an invitation to repeat the crime. Because if they do and they get the profit and nothing happens, tomorrow they will continue doing the same crime.
Thank you very much for this perspective. This cycle has to end. And we are running out of time, so and we already talked about the many challenges and some ways forward. So I would like to invite you now for your concluding remarks to our audience today. So starting with you, Mr. Breckham.
Well, I will also first like to congratulate the winner of this year's prize. She's doing very important work. And from Amazon Watch perspective, you know, there's only a few % of the world's population that are indigenous, but they protect 80% of our biodiversity. So from our perspective, we think that by supporting the indigenous people's struggle for their human rights, we will automatically protect our planet's biodiversity.
Thank you. Ambassador Corell. I think you're muted.
Sorry. Let me first echo what my co-panelists have said. First of all, the last comment about the indigenous people, this is very important. And I know that the Sámi population in Sweden, there are certain problems there that we have to look further at. Now, I was involved in these issues back in the 1970s, 80s, but many years ago. I would also like to echo what was said about the necessity that suspected crimes must be investigated and criminals must be brought to justice. And also, if there are people who are under threat, the competent authorities of the country must protect them. But I would also like to focus on one very special issue, namely the responsibility of politicians. They have a very special responsibility here, in particular if they serve in the National Legislative Assembly or if they serve in central or local government. And I would therefore like to draw attention to a publication that is now available free of charge on the web in 26 languages. Rule of Law, a guide for politicians. Can you see it there? Yeah? Rule of Law, a guide for politicians. It is available in 26 languages with more to come in only some 40 pages. And this is the translation into Portuguese. And this guide is the fruit of a discussion among further heads of state, former heads of state and government some years ago when Helmut Schmidt, when I was invited as an advisor, and Helmut Schmidt all of a sudden ask me, well, what about the rule of law? I wonder if politicians are aware of their responsibility for the rule of law. And this gave birth to this guide, and it doesn't cost anything. This was the idea from the beginning, and it is available, as I said, in 26 languages. And I think it's very important to spread this message, because ultimately they are the ones who legislate, they are the ones who govern at the top level and also local level at national, in the national systems. So I think that this is the message I would like to leave here. The responsibility of politicians, they must inform themselves about this and see to it that they have proper legislation, including the elements of the rule of law that I just mentioned. Thank you.
A very useful tool indeed. Thank you. Ambassador Stagno?
Yeah, maybe I'd like to highlight that the real conflict over the Amazon is not one of sovereignty, as Bolsonaro likes to claim, against environmentalism. It is between criminal mafias that are raising the rainforest and law-abiding citizens like Osvaldo who are trying to stop them. And Bolsonaro has effectively sided with the mafias. Thanks to the continuing courage, however, of forest defenders and the outside pressure that can be brought to bear upon the Bolsonaro administration, including at present through the unique leverage that the European Union has over Brazil due to the yet to be ratified trade deal, but also through events like this one, by giving the lonely voice of Osvaldo a much larger megaphone thanks to the Edelstam Prize. Brazil can change course. Let's not forget that back in 2004 to 2012 Brazil did reduce reforestation by about 80%. So it is feasible to reverse the budget cuts and the policies that have weakened environmental protections in Brazil since, and that have multiplied under Bolsonaro. And in the meantime, obrigado, Osvaldo.
Obrigada. Dr. Castresana?
Yes. As conclusion, I would say we have two challenges. One today and the other one for the future, for our grandchildren. The challenge today, as has been clearly established in this discussion, is to enforce the law we already have and to guarantee that Osvaldo and the other people are doing protected peacefully in their own place without fearing threats or bribery and finally attacks that have caused the loss of many lives already. So the challenge today is to enforce the law we already have in force, because impunity is precisely this, that we have the law, but the law is not applied, is not respected, and nothing happens. But we have a challenge for the future also. We learned in 1945 the disasters of the Second World War against the civilian population, and then we created the crimes. I hope that one day the crime of ecocide will be also created and will be enforced, and there will be a convention making mandatory for the states to prosecute the most serious attacks against environment. And hopefully this will be a reality without being necessary to suffer a disaster equivalent to the ones in the Second World War, before we are able to establish clearly that the most serious attacks against these sanctuaries of the preservation of the environment for all the humanity are a reality. We need to act now to prevent the abuses of the future.
Thank you very much for this perspective.
Anna, if I may, Anna, I forgot to mention or answer the question, how do you find the guide on the rule of law for politicians? It's just to Google those words, rule of law, a guide for politicians, and you will find the guide and all the translations immediately on the web. And Osvaldo, now falo português. Muito obrigado. This much I know of Portuguese. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are really running out of time. So we would like to thank our distinguished panelists for their participation today, and also the Royal Park Studio for hosting us and broadcasting this event. I would like to thank the Edelstam Foundation for the incredible work that they do supporting human rights defenders. And as a Brazilian and woman and environmentalist, I really want to thank Osvalinda for her work. She really is an inspiration for me and for all of us. And I really hope that in the coming years, we can support you in your work and protecting our forest. For our audience today, thank you very much for bearing with us. And if you want to contribute to this cause, please get in touch with us. Thank you and stay safe.